This is ContactTalkRadio.com. Consciousness in action. And you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Ping.fm, and Upsnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the book.
Welcome to Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, Sherry Horn Hassan of Karmic Evolution Astrology, coming to you on February 18th from snowy New Jersey and Contact Talk Radio. Just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. My guest today is professional astrologer DIANNE LAWSON, who I'll introduce properly, as always, in just a few minutes. But first, my usual housekeeping stuff. You can find all my posts, weekly posts and monthly new moon and full moon pieces on my Facebook page at Karmic Evolution for Your Soul. And if you want to access my show after the fact, because you can't listen to it live, as many people often cannot, that is on my karmicevolution.com website. If you click on the website and go to radio show on the upper right-hand banner, click there, you can scroll down and listen to archived recordings of this live show. The other thing is, if you're on my Facebook page, or you want to go to my website, or you want to send me an email, which I'll give you in just a minute, to get on my newsletter list so that you don't miss any of my posts on Facebook, or perhaps you're not on Facebook, you can shoot me an email at Sherry, SHERI, at karmicevolution.com, or go to the Facebook page, go to the left-hand side, scroll down to join email list, and fill that out there. And finally, I am continuing to offer, as I have for quite some time, my discounted 1-hour, $99 Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading to listeners. So if you would like, I'm going to give you my little ad, which is want to gain greater consciousness about your soul's true mission and purpose in this lifetime, move from chaos to clarity in your relationships, career, finances, health, heal old karmic wounds, and co-create your own future happiness and success, awaken to your true potential and highest destiny in this lifetime. Well, that's easy when you take advantage of my special discounted offer for listeners, a 1-hour Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for only $99. Again, simply email Sherry, that's SHERI, at karmicevolution.com, and we'll get your reading booked today. At almost half the regular price, conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable. All right, so let's get into this week's Astro news you can use. The monthly lunar cycle's waxing now, since last week's February 11th Aquarius new moon asked us to plant seeds that allow us freedom from old associations that no longer share our true values. And this could mean breaking away from friends, from family members, workplaces, or work environments, in terms of colleagues and bosses and all that, communities, group associations, etc. And in some cases, even switching sides or affiliations entirely. I don't think that we can fail to have noticed, any of us who pay attention to the news, that this is going on the political level. All right. So yesterday, February 17th, we experienced the first Saturn in Aquarius square to Uranus and Taurus, and this square will repeat on June 14th and December 24th, making this an energy that will wax and wane for the duration of 2021. Now, remember, Aquarius is not inherently a rebellious archetype. The pure Aquarian archetype loves friends and groups, doesn't want to go it alone. This is why the process of individuating during our lifetimes is one of our major themes as we attempt to grow in consciousness. Some of us do incarnate rebellious, yes. And for this group, individuating actually means something different. It means finding like-minded friends and groups that accept them for who and what they are, and who allow them to no longer remain feeling like a shunned outcast. So let's talk about this square and the nature of the square. Saturn, right, which insists circumstances in our lives remain structured and based upon a solid foundation, in Aquarius values a strong foundational commitment, that's Saturn, to our friends, our tribe, our clan, our community, etc. It's kind of a safety in numbers philosophy. It's a united we stand, divided we fall. The task when Saturn goes through Aquarius, which it does now until March of 2023, so we're looking at another 2 years, is to seek out friends and groups and to quote unquote associate with those who help us establish a greater foundation or foothold in life from which we may again grow in consciousness, which is a major way to work toward achieving individuation in the end. Uranus, however, desires rapid change now. And Uranus lets us know, usually through sudden, surprising, and often shocking events, that the only constant is change, not resistance to change. So in Taurus, Uranus asks us to view who and what we value through a new lens, a new perspective, and to determine if change is necessary going forward. So we have this tension where Saturn attempts to keep the status quo, regardless of how obvious the need is for change over the long term, while Uranus promotes rushing toward change, regardless of how this might upset the existing established order. Now, when Saturn in Aquarius, again, made his first quarter square yesterday to Uranus and Taurus on February 17th, we got several symbolic pieces of news. The first was a piece that I thought was more local, but I see it did play out more nationally, about the demolition of one of Donald Trump's failed casinos in Atlantic City, which was actually imploded with, I think I saw, don't quote me on this, but 3,000 sticks of dynamite, okay? I think it's interesting, for those of you who listened to the show last week, I think it was, when Joseph Adea was on, you know, I often equate the Piscean archetype with chaos, but that's the kind of a chaos that's emotional, right? It's kind of like, we don't know, you know, from chaos comes clarity. It's the ocean. It's, you know, being part of this greater sea of humanity and stuff. But Aquarius energy can also be chaotic. And that's something that Joseph was pointing out, but it's more of a sudden chaos. It's a sudden explosion. It causes PTSD, right? So we can see that blowing up something with dynamite, a physical structure with a foundation and walls and a roof, which was Trump's casino, you know, was just instantly, you look and it's there, you blink and it's gone, right? Now, I noted that this casino, which was the Trump, hang on, what was it called? It was the Trump Plaza and Hotel Casino. It was one of the most successful. It opened in 1984. So notice that this was early in the last Saturn-Pluto cycle, which began in Libra in very late 82 and very early 83. They had exact hits. So his casino at the time was hailed as one of the most successful, drawing celebrities from all over the world. And according to CBS News, I'm going to quote this: the once iconic casino frequented by celebrities, rock stars, and athletes opened its doors in 1984, held several high-profile boxing matches that Trump attended, Mars on his ascendant, and touted itself as Atlantic City's centerpiece. In 2014, it was shut down and the luxury building fell into disrepair, prompting its demolition. Again, according to ABC News. I also saw that it belongs now to Carl Icahn, the billionaire who was, I think, didn't he used to be the CEO of American Airlines? I think it was. Anyway, I would assume if he owns it, it's his decision to demolish it and rebuild something there. So we can see that with the new Saturn-Pluto cycle having started a year ago, right? That we're moving on. An old era has ended, a new one is beginning. ABC also reported in the same article that something else was demolished yesterday too. And this is real interesting. It was at Mar-a-Lago. And here's what the paper, or what they wrote in their news piece. Separately, in Palm Beach, Florida, demolition crews at Mar-a-Lago removed a helipad on Tuesday that was constructed during Trump's presidency in 2017. Now, I'll remind you that the helipad is on the Earth. It's a foundation on which you land a helicopter, right? Terra firma. And Aquarius energy and Uranian energy is flight, it's movement. It's, it's associated with birds and with movement of thought and with, progressive thinking and all that. So the airplane landing pad was demolished. And this helipad was used to transport Trump from Mar-a-Lago to the Palm Beach, Florida airport, although the article points out that that didn't happen often, and it was demolished because he's no longer president, so he doesn't need to use it. So I just checked his chart real quick, right? And guess what? I knew that transiting Pluto's been in his 5th house and already opposed his 11th house, 23-degree, 48-minute Saturn in Cancer. But today, which is a day after the Saturn-Uranus square exact, today, transiting Pluto's at 25 degrees, 44 minutes of Capricorn, opposing his 25-degree, 45-minute Venus in Cancer. I don't think you can get more literal than that in terms of something once valuable now being destroyed or going up in smoke. And the other big news this week, which also hit the airwaves yesterday, was the death of right-wing radio, these are my words, hate caster Rush Limbaugh. So I won't go into the details except to say that, again, his death marks the end of an era. He sprang up in the 1980s and the early 90s during the end of the Reagan political years and the origins of Rupert Murdoch extending his media empire into the United States in the early 90s through Fox News and his other newspaper acquisitions. So the rise of socially acceptable right-wing media had Limbaugh at its forefront, and he became one of its spokespeople. Okay, on a more hopeful note, I read this morning as well in the New York Times that President Biden has resurrected a new gender policy council. And the headline says, the White House is taking women's issues seriously, really. So I remind you as well that Uranus and Aquarius, when it comes to being different, it does have a correlation with gender. Are you, those of us who have kids or younger, children or grandchildren who no longer identify themselves as he or she, there's and the rise of the LGBTQ community in terms of its quest for civil rights, and that, even within the civil rights movement, it's women, it's particularly Black women and Latina women who have moved the needle in this country away from some of the more right-wing stuff that sprang up during the 80s and the last Saturn-Pluto cycle. So this is a resurrected because Hillary Clinton, when she was the first lady, had a policy that had a gender council that was similar. It just never got as much attention and it never got as much respect because it didn't report directly to the president. And so it didn't have the, congressional support or the administrative support that it would have gotten. Now it's reporting directly to Biden. So it's very interesting. All right, so let's get back real quickly to the Saturn square to Uranus. Since Saturn prefers slow, but Uranus prefers fast change, now's the time to ensure that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, okay? So what we're challenged to do on a more personal level as we go forward this year is to embark on creative change, making creative changes in our lives without becoming impulsively, rebelliously destructive. So, it takes time for us to review and to change or modify our ideological thought processes. And I say that especially now as Mercury is still retrograde in Aquarius until February 20th. He challenges us in Aquarius to look at how we relate to others based on our current ideas and perspectives. So changes that have been necessary but a long time coming, which is to say ignored, because most of us, we like our security. It's like, yeah, I know I should change that. Yeah, I know I should change it. But it's not until, the oven dies that you go, it's been acting funny. I guess I should have, researched buying a new one, but whatever, and then something sudden happens and all of a sudden you don't have a choice. And, these kinds of things often come into our lives in a swift, shocking display. And then we have to act. We can't not, assuming we want to continue to have that service or, our friend or whatever is starting to implode. Now, Uranus reveals to us, though, Saturn's flawed claim that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And instead illustrates for us how business as usual simply won't fly anymore because society's values have changed. And if society's values have changed, but our personal ones are stuck in a bygone era, how can progress be made? This is the ultimate battle or tension between Saturn and Uranus this year. So, and I put this in my newsletter yesterday and on my Facebook page, so some of this may be redundant for some of you, but I think it bears repeating. This year now is the time for us to ask ourselves, where am I stuck in an old mindset that needs review? How can I allow in a wider perspective without becoming fearful or reacting fearfully to it? And where am I most in need of change in my life, but also most resistant to change? And again, the more that we resist change, whether we consciously do it or not, the more likely that change, when it happens, will be sudden, surprising, and potentially shocking. So the sun today is February 18th, to Pisces. And Pisces is an energy that is dreamy. It is collective oriented, but also addiction oriented. It is spiritual. And what I wrote yesterday was that, when the sun moves into empathetic, dreamy, creative, psychic, spiritual, charitable, addiction prone, but collective minded Pisces on February 18th, it paves the way for a month where we may intuitively recognize we're neither victim nor martyr, but rather simply human. And as part of the human race, we recognize our similarities rather than focusing on our differences. And that's especially true with Jupiter and Saturn and Mercury and Venus all in Aquarius right now, right? Well, united we stand. Realizing we're all brothers and sisters under the skin allows us to walk a mile in another's shoes and to understand the actual meaning of there but for the grace of God go I, or no man is an island, no man stands alone. And in doing so, we recognize that our compassion for others calls us to realize that we too are deserving of compassion ourselves. To see oneself as part of the greater ocean of all life allows us to swim in the same waters together and to live, love, suffer, and heal, knowing we're as equally deserving of both love and compassion as anybody else. Now, on February 19th, Venus in Aquarius will square Mars in Taurus, and some discord may arise in our relationships. Mars is impatient. Mars wants what he wants. He's also a sexual sign, so this particular discord may play out as sexual tensions in partnerships. But, one is ego-oriented. Venus wants peace and harmony and serenity, and Mars wants action. And, so the fact that this is a fixed square, it might pit our need for freedom of expression, which is Venus in Aquarius, against how much others value the needs of their own ego desires, which is Mars and Taurus. And, compromise is always the answer, but it may be difficult to reach compromise, at least temporarily. This is a very fleeting aspect, so it's not something that's necessarily, it could trigger things, but hopefully it triggers a conversation and a white flag truce of some kind after the fact. Now, any decisions around old relating patterns that have been under review since Mercury stationed retrograde at approximately 26 degrees Aquarius on January 30th are now ready for implementation when Mercury stations retrograde at approximately 11 degrees Aquarius on February 20th. So if we've used this period wisely, we've reviewed how we relate to both others and ourselves, and any current or future plans and projects. So perhaps we made necessary revisions to help ensure future success, in a particular plan that we have for the future. Maybe we've decided to forego a particular plan altogether, or perhaps a new idea for a future project was revealed to us. And this, when I say project, this extends to our relationships and our partnerships. So whatever the case, now is the time to press go, to resume communications, to shift the focus back, at least as of February 20th, just a couple days from now, and to go back to empirical, left brain, logical thinking. All right. And, now's the time when we can implement and make it happen. And whether that means readjusting personal relationships, abandoning or strengthening old plans, or beginning something entirely new, it's a green light time. So the other thing is that I don't have, hang on. I think it's on, hang on. I lost my, Venus squares, the 20th. I think it's on Monday. No, next week. There's not much going on. We have moon action, but until the 24th, Mars in Taurus will trine Pluto in Capricorn. This is an earthy trine, right? Trine is an easy aspect, but this is one of empowerment. Anytime we got Mars and Pluto combined together in aspect, and this is known as an easy aspect, it's about empowerment, and it's about self-empowerment. So being motivated to make deep changes that can transform us as we go forward, particularly related to, again, our ego and our ego's desires, or taking an action that will transform something in our world, might have something to do with the Saturn, the bigger backdrop of the Saturn-Pluto and the Jupiter-Saturn cycle, as well as this year's Saturn square Uranus. It could be any or all of the above, taking an action like switching political parties, or dropping out of a group, or joining a new group, finding support elsewhere. All of these things are up for review. All right, so as usual, babbled long enough. So now let me introduce this week's guest, Dianne Lawson, a professional astrologer. Hang on a second. A professional astrologer since 1973, maintains a worldwide clientele, and published her book Extraordinary Relationships Through Astrology on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, and her website at DianneLawson.com. She's also written more than 100 astrology articles for magazines, taught numerous astrology classes, been a guest on countless podcasts and radio shows, and disseminates a wide variety of astrological subjects for people to read about or listen to through her emails and her, sorry, I didn't turn off my phone, through her emails, or her email list, which you can sign up for on her website. So welcome, Dianne. How are you today?
Well, I'm doing really well, and I'm delighted to be here. How are you?
I'm good. I'm delighted that you're back with us. I think you were on, I think it was almost a year ago, perhaps. I think it was last March or April or something when you were on last time. So I'm pleased to have you back again. So I know that you specialize particularly in relationships. And you had said to me when we conversed by email that you find that people never tire of talking about Mercury retrograde periods. So I figure let's focus on that, at least initially, and talk about Mercury's most recent retrograde through Aquarius, which, of course, like I said, is coming to an end in only 2 days. And what you consider to be Mercury's major specific purpose in terms of going through this particular sign of Aquarius at this particular moment in time.
Okay, well, Sherry, you mentioned my website, and I would let everyone know that on my website, I have a lengthy section about Mercury retrograde, and I talk about there what I think it means and the dates and its retrograde, but also I have 20 things that you should do or you could do under Mercury retrograde. People tend to view Mercury retrograde as negative, and it certainly doesn't have to be. I think there's a natural ebb and flow to the universe. You know, the sun comes up, the sun goes down, Mercury goes direct, Mercury retrogrades. I think when Mercury retrogrades is a time to review and reflect and rethink and resolve. And Aquarius has a lot to do with being inventive and progressive, and it's a time for us to recognize in our lives when it's time to move forward rather than holding on to the past. And so I think when Mercury is in Aquarius, it's a great time for us to do that. It's also, Aquarius is very humanitarian. It's you mentioned this about the individual, but it's also about the collective. It's about humanity as a whole. I think we can stop and think about how do we treat others? How do we treat humanity as a whole? And well, I'll probably be talking about this more if we talk about the big square that's coming up this year. Mm-hmm. But it seems like we're just at each other's throats. It's hard to communicate about anything. And so Mercury does have to do with communication. So it's a good time to slow down, stop, and think, how can I communicate differently with others? I notice on Facebook, people are just vicious with each other now, just snippy, and it's hard to have any view without people attacking you. And it's a time for us to stop and reflect. How do we treat each other? How do we treat others? One thing that I don't think people talk enough about when they think of Mercury is Mercury, of course, does rule communication and transportation, but it also rules learning and work. And Aquarius is all about inventions and technology, and we're having to rethink about how do we learn. Kids are going to school online. People are staying at home working online. So it's a real time for us to be redoing and rethinking and resolving Aquarian kind of issues.
Right. And I think that falls under the umbrella of the larger cycle of Uranus in Taurus right now, and also, which we will talk about a little later, more definitively, the Saturn square Uranus, Saturn and Aquarius square Uranus and Taurus, because during the Mercury retrograde period, I think what's been in the news a lot, Mercury, obviously communication, like you said, is whether children should go back to school and whether it's safe for them to go back to school. And there's some kind of, I think issues that have been in the forefront for the whole past year about whether we act as a nation in a unity or whether we look at each individual case specifically, right? Is there a lot of disease in one community, even within a particular state that regulates its education system, but then has parsed out that obligation to its counties and its cities and its counties and whatever. So, I agree with you. I think there's a lot of trying to figure out a way to serve everyone through impartial debate. I think Mercury in Aquarius allows us to bring back the art of debate. So to your point about the vitriol on social media, I think maybe that might be something that we're going to be looking into, not just in the U.S., but all over the world. And I think that's part of the Saturn square Uranus, which I've mentioned on previous shows. But let me ask you a more specific question real quick, which is that, you know, you and I know that Mercury has what's called a shadow period. And the shadow period starts when Mercury hits the degree to which it's going to retrograde back to. And it ends after the retrograde ends and Mercury once again returns to the degree at which it's stationed originally, right? Did I get that right? Because now I'm confusing myself. But Mercury retrogrades between 3 and 4 times per year, depending on the calendar year, for approximately 21 days each. And if you include in the shadow period, which in this case, because it began on January 20th, he won't pass out of his shadow until March 13th. You get an elongated period. And some astrologers think that Mercury retrograde rules still apply, which is something you referred to a little bit earlier, which is, you know, yeah, don't sign the contracts if you can help it, don't make major purchases, you know, and review everything, read the fine print 50 times instead of twice, you know. So do you think that this is still a more, you know, a time to be more wary, or do you think that implementation of reviewed plans is okay once he stations direct, literally?
You know, I have read other astrologers, and everybody disagrees. I've read that the station period is stronger than the retrograde period. I've read that the retrograde period is the strongest and the shadow is less strong, and some people think all of it is. I have a lot of clients who firmly believe that the shadow period is very strong. But I also know when things happen to people, they often blame it on retrograde, even when there's no retrograde going on. You know,
There's usually some kind of retrograde in the sky, right? It just might not be Mercury. It might be affecting their Mercury.
Right. You're absolutely right. But I'll tell you what I personally do in my life, but I'm not 100% sure. But I think if this was really factual and cut and, you know, carved in stone, I think all astrologers would agree. I mean, all astrologers agree what Venus means, but we don't all agree on what the shadow period means. So I'm going to tell you what I do, and I'm saying that I've heard a lot of other people say a lot of other things, but I will not send a manuscript to a new publisher or a new editor when it's retrograde. I will when it's in the shadow. Mm-hmm. One of my sons bought a house, and he bought it the minute retrograde or Mercury went direct. I mean, literally the minute. He told the realtor he would sign it. It was like at 11:50 p.m.
Right. Too funny.
Not a minute
the
before.
Realtor either went, "Oh, cool," or "You're nuts," but it doesn't matter because I get my commission. All right.
Absolutely. So that's what I personally do. I think what I'm doing right now is I am not doing things like signing contracts or starting, anything majorly new under the retrograde. However, I have started new jobs under Mercury retrograde, and even though the job only lasted for 3 months, it turned out to be incredibly wonderful for a whole host of reasons, which led me to other jobs. And I mean, it turned out really well. So Mercury retrograde doesn't necessarily mean something bad. It can lead to good things.
Right. I always go back to, and I said this last week or the week before, I mean, it's not always what happens to us during Mercury retrograde. It's how we decide to handle it, Mm-hmm. But yeah, interesting. I mean, my jury's out on it too. I really haven't decided. There are sometimes I pay attention to it, sometimes I don't. But and I don't know what you think of this. I didn't talk to you about this before, and we don't have to dwell on it. But there's the theory that people who are born with a Mercury retrograde fare better under Mercury retrograde, and I have a Mercury retrograde natally, so I don't know if you have any insight into that.
I know a lot of my clients who were born under Mercury retrograde who say it doesn't affect them because they know how to deal with it.
Yeah. sometimes I think that's true, but then you have a Mercury retrograde period where you're like, oh no, I was just telling some friends the story of taking my son on a cruise in 1997. At Christmas time, we were driving to the New York docks or pier or whatever, because the ship was leaving from New York going down towards Florida and the Bahamas. And I was divorced a few years, and both his father and I have legal, what do you call it? Joint legal, whatever, jurisdiction over him. So he was going to be technically leaving the country because we were going to Atlantis and I don't even remember where, but I had to get a letter from his father, which I had gotten, but I had forgotten to take with me. And en route to the ship, we had hired a town car, and we were halfway there or more, and I realized I didn't have this letter. We weren't going to be able to get on the ship, So I had to call a friend, a neighbor, who had to crawl through an open window in my kitchen to go into the file drawer to get the letter and then fax it to the. So it's just one of those things where it's like, after the fact, it's hysterical, When it's happening, it's panic city, So I certainly can't say that as a Mercury retrograde natally. Nothing like that ever happened to me. I mean, there are plenty of other stories like that too, maybe not as dire or whatever. But yeah, I think it depends on where it's retrograding in your chart and whether it's touching any, natal planets or angles or other sensitive points. But it's so funny, right? So let me ask you, because I did ask you about Mercury in Aquarius, but let me ask you if you find any difference in the overall meaning of Mercury retrograde cycles now when it shifts from one element to another. So, for example, we know that in 2021, starting with this particular cycle, which is the first one of the year, it's now in air, whereas last year it was mostly in water. Do you attribute any difference in how we think about it or handle it this year versus last year or any of the other elemental cycles?
Well, I think this year, with Mercury retrograde being in air, I think we're given opportunities to look at how we think. Mercury rules thinking. Are we positively thinking? Do we have negative thinking about other people, certain groups? How do we communicate with others? Are we communicating others respectfully? How are we going to do education? How are we going to do it, in the future? A lot of people love remote learning. Are we going to continue to do that? So I think we're giving an opportunity to be more thoughtful and more conscious, especially in how we relate to others. Air is all about relationships and communication with others. So I think we're going to be given opportunities in those areas.
Right. So, for example, when he goes through Gemini, which he'll retrograde in Gemini from May 29th to June 22nd of this year. And Gemini, as the ruler of the third house, is early childhood learning, right? And as well, obviously, is Mercury's communication in the sign of communication. Do you think we'll focus more at that point on some of these other things related to school?
Well, I think school's going to be out for a lot of people, but I still think people are going to have to be dealing with it. I don't think the pandemic is going to be gone by June 22nd. I hate to say that, but I think they're going to have to be doing some thinking. And some kids really do well and like it. Of course, most of the parents don't, because they have to do double duty of being the teacher and hold on to their job and do all the other things. But yeah, I think it's going to be continuing in that area.
Yeah, there was a news show I was watching. I don't remember. Somebody was being interviewed, and they asked about. I know, it was Randy Weingarten, who's the head of the teachers union in New York. And I know her name because when the teachers went on strike in like 1960 something, she was the head of the teachers union then. And I looked at her and I went, wow, she looks pretty good. I thought she'd be like 100 years old, because I was like not even 10 years old back then. Anyway, they talked about summer school. So I have a feeling that might be the implementation this June 22nd, at least where, on the East Coast or where I live now, Jersey and New York, and I think probably Connecticut and most of New England, up and down the coast are, they end their school year somewhere around June 21st, somewhere between the 21st and the 28th. So I wonder if it will lead to an implementation of summer school, after it's over. But also, so now we move to Libra, right? Libra is going to be the retrograde elemental sign from September 29th through October 18th. How do you think that will shift partnership? The Republicans and the Democrats going to come together? Will we stop screaming at each other online? Will we go, I got my $1,400 check, yay!
I don't think the Democrats and the Republicans are going to get along by then. I think you're optimistic to even suggest that, but I think
I'm joking in a way, because what I'm saying is that Mercury's, in Libra, and this is kind of what I'm asking your take on. Libra sees both sides of the story, right?
Right.
And tries to broker compromise. So I was joking that, the compromise would be set and we'll all be well, but, there's potential for some kind of headway there, right?
Yeah. Well, I see Libra, the symbol for Libra is the scales, and I see it kind of going way up and way down politically. But I think for people, I think it will give us an opportunity to improve our relationships. And it also will help us get rid of who we no longer serves us. I mean, we don't have to be around negative people, and we can rethink how we do relationships, what's important and what's working and what's not working. And if it's, if we're feeling lonely, what do we need to do to have contact with people? Or if we don't like someone but we're always around them, why is that happening? It's a time to just rethink how we do relationships.
Yeah. And at that point, who knows? I don't know whether the plans will come to fruition that most Americans, at least here, I'm aware there's a rest of the whole entire world, but will be inoculated. And, even though we'd be going into the fall period where theoretically, if the pandemic isn't under control, it would then increase, that we will all be together, warding it off. But that might just be Piscean wishful thinking. I don't know. So let's go back to Saturn square Uranus. I'd like to ask you the difference in your assessment of it between how it might affect us all on a collective level versus on the personal level.
Okay, well, let's talk about the collective first. I think collectively we're going to be feeling this more of a collective sense of responsibility toward others, recognizing people who are different from us are still us, still our neighbors, still part of who we are. I think we're going to be moving in that direction, and I know it doesn't feel like it now because there's so much animosity and so much hatred toward other groups, but I think that's what we're going to be doing. And Saturn is the planet of karma, and it often gets what you earn. Sometimes people say it gets what you need to learn, but I think often it gets you what you've earned. And it's often limitations and loneliness and patience. It's kind of the old way of doing. And then Uranus it often feels like it's pretty different from that. It's a planet of change. It's unexpected. But what's interesting about this is Saturn in Aquarius, to me, is kind of a mixed bag, because Aquarius is all about the new and change and unexpected. And then Taurus is the most, with Uranus and Taurus is the most resistant to change. And so I think it just feels kind of like a convoluted mess. Like, how do we interpret this? Because, Saturn is old, Aquarius is new, Uranus is new, Taurus is old. And then when you have this square, there's a lot of tension and challenge between those two. But I don't think anything in astrology is good or bad. I think you can use any kind of energy, including challenging ones. And the older I get, the more I like squares, because even though they're tense and a big challenge and often hard, but they give you drive and energy. And often I've noticed the older I get, the more I get done when I have squares in my individual chart. It gives me energy, and I feel like I have to get this done. It often causes pressure for me to get it done. So having these two planets, which have a lot of things that are not similar to each other, and a square, I think you can just look around at the United States or the world, or even in your own communications with people. There is just a heck of a lot of discord. I don't want to talk to anybody about whether or not I'm getting the vaccine, whether or not you should vaccinate children, whether or not you should wear a mask, and you sure don't talk about abortions or guns or religions or politics.
Right.
Because
used to be you couldn't talk about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Now you can't talk about guns and politics.
But I think collectively we're going to start as a society accepting people who aren't like us, and we're going to be more inclusive. I think there's still going to be fighting and arguing to get there, but everybody always keeps going back to January the 6th, but that's just a real good example about how people are stressed and they're angry, and there's certainly a lot of energy and tension going on in this country and worldwide. There's been a coup, and there are all these protests, and worldwide there's this unease and not being happy. And so one thing I think is interesting is the last time Uranus was in Taurus was the time of the New Deal, and there was regulation of banks and the WPA and Social Security. I mean, it really changed, progressive ideas in terms of money and banking. I think that is going to be happening during this square. I think there are going to be changes this year. I think there may be more regulation of banks and more progressive way of distributing wealth.
I agree with you. Yeah. You mentioned also social media, and I do believe, and I think they know it, that regulation is coming where in areas, especially this country. I saw a piece yesterday, I think, about, gosh, I'm trying to remember the country. I think it was Australia. They were, the Australian legislative body or government or whatever, whoever rules over it, was demanding payment from both Google and Facebook for news organizations that posted on their sites. Google was accepting it and Facebook was objecting to it. So in other words, major newspapers or media companies that would post news, they want to be paid by the platform as opposed to the other way around, So it's interesting because I don't know if that's going to be the battle in America. I don't think so. I think it's just going to be, it's going to fall under arguments about the First Amendment. But it's definitely coming, and they know it's coming, So they're girding now, and some of that square, I think, will be the back and forth about justifying or not, how to disseminate information to the masses. And where regulation or whether the fairness in media doctrine should be resurrected in this country for all media, including now applied to social media, because they're treated as two different animals right now, right? So I think, And on the personal level, how would you say that, anything else that, comes to mind about that?
Well, I think on a personal level, we need to be willing to make changes in our lives that aren't working, and especially in how we make money. And this has been real clear in the United States, where so many people have lost their jobs and are unemployed. And some people are able to make the shift. They're able to adjust. They're able to be creative and inventive and kind of create a new way of making money. And but there's also, I think there's also going to be a change in how we spend money. Some people really like Amazon because it delivers to your house like in a day. And some people really hate Amazon because they think it takes away from local shops. And we have to figure out how we want to spend our money. And then we also need to figure out what in the heck is important to us. One of the things that I have been doing a lot of lately is trying to figure out what is the most important in my life. What do I value the most? And am I spending time? Saturn is all about time. Am I spending time where I should be spending time, or am I wasting? I'm wasting it on social media. Gosh.
Yeah. Any of us with mutable energy has a good exercise. That and escapist tendencies, right?
Right.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I agree. I think focus and, I look at Uranus as our ideology, right? And, it's so interesting because I think it could play several different ways. I keep thinking, and I don't want to take up too much time because we only have a few minutes left, but the Jupiter-Saturn square that began at the end of December, right? The king is dead, long live the new king. It's known as the king, the change in the throneship. Of course, we had that with our election in the United States, but how the mythology or the archetype of that, or the derivation of that Jupiter-Saturn cycle representing that, is the old king is the father, and he dies because he's old, and the new king is the young man, right? But in what happened literally in this country is that the old king died because Trump is no longer president when he was voted out, and the new king is older than him, literally. So, and has been around and has all these Saturnian qualities to him. So it's just so interesting because it's like the old guy became king. The old guy left and the old guy became king. Right. So I had said on the show before that I think the center will hold because there's so much Saturn here, and in combination with Uranus, which is groups. So finding new foundations for old groups, new ideological foundations for old groups, or finding new groups with new ideologies, But I don't want to take away from the couple of minutes we have left. So tell us, Diane, how everyone can contact you, if they can find out about what you're doing now, any upcoming lectures or webinars, how they can buy your book or book a reading with you, or anything else you want to mention.
Okay, well, I would like to send everybody to my website because it's going to have all that information in it. And my website is www.DIANNELAWSON.com. And Diane is DIANNELAWSON. And I mentioned before I have a lengthy Mercury retrograde page. I also have a page on an article I wrote years ago. I think it was published in Dale magazine on astrology and the Bible. And that always gets a lot of hit. People are really interested in what the Bible really says about astrology. It has my blog on there. It has a sign-up place for people to sign up to get my emails. And my emails are about astrology information and sometimes astronomy information. And you can also buy my book, which is Extraordinary Relationships Through Astrology. So if you want interested in learning more about what astrology says about relationships. And then, of course, it has all of my services. And I provide birth charts and yearly forecast. I do the ancient form of horary astrology. It's like horoscope, but it's horary, which can answer any question, which is amazing. It's goosebumpy amazing. And relocation and chart comparisons and, most of, all of the usual kinds of astrology services. So they can read all about me, and I'm going to send them to my website, www.DIANNELAWSON.com.
All right, very cool. Very, very cool. All right, well, thanks so much, Diane. It's been a pleasure talking to you again. I'm thinking maybe I'll ask you to come back on when Mercury is retrograde in Libra. We'll talk about your book more, which I know we did last year, but, it'll be a good time to resurrect some of that and talk about what's going on at that time. Sound good?
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Okay, cool. All right, we'll be on the lookout for an email. But meanwhile, thank you for joining us, and thanks to everyone else for joining us, too. I hope you've all found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me next week on February 25th for another episode of Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking, when I'll welcome back one of my favorite astrologers, financial and medical astrologer Mitchell Lewis. So don't miss that one. I'm sure he'll be talking about the pandemic as well as the financial markets, because who knows what will be happening between now and next week, especially with the Saturn square Uranus and several financial astrologers' predictions about that. In any case, tune in then. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to go